So good evening, everyone. And today, the legal cluster, we will be holding our January Roundtable conference on the topic of death penalty in the light of mental illness and what is insanity under the criminal jurisprudence. So Nandini and I will be moderating this roundtable conference. And so Nandini, want to introduce yourself?
My name is Nandini, and I've been with this cluster for a while now, and I'm a fourth-year law student. And Ishita, why don't you go next?
Hi, I'm Ishita, and I'm a first-year law student from JGLS.
Shreya? Oh, Lavanshi. Either one of you.
I'm Lavanshi. I'm a third-year law student, and it has been a while that I am part of the legal cluster.
Hi, I'm Shreya. I'm a third-year liberal arts student majoring in economics and sociology, and I'm one of the latest additions to the legal cluster at Nickel Time.
Okay, so guys, let's start with the introduction right now. So basically, there are a lot of people that suffer from mental illness and are usually at a very disadvantaged position when they face criminal charges. And the situation for them is much worse when the charges result in like a death sentence. So there is always a stigma which is attached like with the accused and convicts and that suffer serious mental illness. So they are afraid that they'll not be understood by the people and even by the law, and it will never be in favor of them. So there are basically like two factors that guide and affect such cases. So individuals suffering from like severe mental illness are often coerced into giving confessions, and they cannot exercise their rights of like going to an attorney, or they cannot even comprehend their rights. So as a result, like such individuals we see like are at a very great risk of like losing their lives and are sent to like unfair sentences. And international law condemns the execution of mentally ill people, but still there are many countries that have banned it. And the important consideration that is to be taken of that are the defendant's state of mind, which is very important. Like while seeing the insane person's state of mind while he was committing the crime. Then mental illness and its effect on like capital crimes. So the prominent situation where it is being used as a defense is declared insanity, a condition which is so severe that a person is not even aware of the surrounding that he's out of touch with when he's committing the crime, and he cannot even differentiate between what is basically right and what is wrong. And insanity affects a capital case in the following ways. So when at the time of commission of the offense the defendant is insane, he can be found to be not guilty on the grounds of insanity. And for period when the defendant is insane, the trial should be suspended until the defendant goes competency. So also executing an insane inmate has no purpose and should be termed unconstitutional, which we will be discussing in detail in the roundtable conference. And we will be talking about each one of our views as well. This is because the convict person is not competent enough to understand the nature of his punishment, and thus the death penalty is rendered useless as it has neither a retributive effect nor a deterrent effect. However, while insanity can shield you from death penalty, serious mental illness cannot. The problem of insanity assumes different, and it's like even a more of a significant proportions in a heterogeneous country in India, where like mass illiteracy, ignorance, and economic differentiation of the people render like any uniformity test of culpability difficulty. The IPC under section 84 of the act, like it exempts people with mental disorders who are not lucid at the time of committing the offense, provided they do not understand the nature of the offense when they are committing it. However, this clause like fails to recognize that the criminal justice system and the legal system should rather be sensitive towards the fact of the condition. And under Article 21 of the Indian Constitution, which talks about a person's life and personal liberty are to be protected, the Tihar jail manual also states that the execution of a convict requires their mental and physical well-being, and therefore a mentally ill person cannot be hanged to death. So like let's discuss like how do we feel about like, I mean, should there be like providing a mental health care to prisoners, like, and should it be like an integral part of a rehabilitation? Does anybody want to go? Like,
Okay, so how about I kick this discussion off? So since the first question is about whether or not the current um, status of mental health in India provides rehabilitation in any way. So my opinion is it does not, because as Sanchali pointed out earlier, what is the point of punishing a person who does not understand the severity of the crime or the reason for the punishment or the punishment itself? Nobody benefits from it. There is only suffering that comes out of it. Furthermore, I would like to point out that if we look at the statistics, I think it's a well-known fact that when we look at prisoners, a majority of them come from lower economic backgrounds or have lower literacy levels. So they themselves are not aware of the mental health issues that they might have or they might suffer from. Therefore, how are they supposed to avail the benefits that our legal system has, or how is our legal system providing for these people? So in my opinion, mental health does need to be it needs to be looked into, it needs to be understood, it needs to be implemented in such a manner that people do benefit from it, people understand where they stand, where they are, and people also don't get punished for something that they do not deserve or do not understand. I guess Shreya had her hand up earlier, so why don't you go ahead?
No, just to add on to what Nandini is saying, there is also a larger issue at par when it comes to Indian prison system is of healthcare itself. It proves to be a larger problem with infectious diseases like HIV, hepatitis, and all of these being widespread, and there is no screening process. I feel like the government needs to create programs where they provide enough funds for a constructive healthcare system to be put up in prisons. You can the view of prisoners has to be changed in a society, and you can't just discard. They cannot be just treated as discarded human beings in civil society, and they need to be looked upon as responsibilities for rehabilitation. So there's also that needs to be inculcated in Indian society. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yes, Lovanshi.
Yeah. Yeah, I would like to build on the point. So the related to statistics. So basically, I was reading this stat report which said that the latest prison statistics of India 2019 reported that only 7,300 inmates suffered from mental illness, which is roughly 1.5% of the total prisoner population. But then again, there was this another report which came from Karnataka, and it mentioned that 33% of their prisoners suffer from various types of mental disorders, which makes 5,000 prisoners being prey to the mental illnesses. And that makes kind of makes this clears this picture that if in one state there are 5,000 inmates who are suffering from mental illness, and the cases which are being reported nationally is just 8,000 inmates being suffering from mental illness, that shows how the cases are underreported, as well as how how it is also undervalued, the mental health of the inmates. Secondly, as we were talking about the health facilities as well, and we know that during this pandemic, there has been issue of overcrowding as well as the high risk of getting the disease. And I also read somewhere that during this period, first of all, there were many under trials which were getting delayed. Above that, there was this facility, and it was kind of issued that when there cannot be family cannot visit the prisoners, so instead of that there can be video conferencing. But only 10 states could implement this, and other states couldn't do this video conferencing, and due to that also many people suffered. And eventually it came out that inmates are like twice as likely to commit suicide as compared to the general population. I mean, I think it gives us a clear picture of the dire need of having some sort of a procedural mental health setup where we have psychologists and like standard procedures to ensure that their mental health is also taken care of, because at the end, rehabilitation, I think, should be the purpose of the general this prisoner system. So yeah, that's what I would like to.
I would just like to add one more thing to what Shreya had said. Basically, what I was also reading a report. So basically it said there was a gap between the stated policy and the actual practice. There are laws, but no one's implementing it. There is laws and proper health standards, ventilating and all, but nothing is being done to it. There are laws basically, but no one's saying. And how even Lovanshi had spoken about the overcrowding and the whole Tihar jail, everyone's known there's so many prisoners, and about the overcrowding, and there is no proper stated policy to ensure about the prisoners' mental health. And yeah, that's what I just wanted to extend what the both of them had said. Shreya, yeah, you wanted to go ahead?
Yeah, I mean, in this capacity, I feel like it's important to react to the situation in the reality of the situation, in terms of what kind of world we really live in. As a person who is not so known to legality and laws as much as say a student of law might be, the fact that this law existed, I knew that there was something relating to mental health and the fact that people cannot be tried unless they are in touch with reality. I know that there was something, because every country should have such a law in their constitution, but I wasn't aware of the exact wording or the exact stipulations of said law before we even opened this discussion. And that is after being educated, after having a very privileged life. So how many people actually know that this law exists? How many people know that they can vie for this defense in their trials or in their court sentencing, because when they're liable to this condition? So yeah.
Exactly. If educated, privileged individuals do not know about it, how do we expect underprivileged, uneducated individuals to know about it? Right. So now moving on to the next question. So do you believe that the system and the procedure of death penalty in India has a negative effect on the mental health of the prisoners? We did answer it to a certain extent, but I'm talking about their life in prison. Is our prison built in such a manner that it affects the mental health of the prisoners, or is our system built in such a manner that it affects the health of our prisoners? Ishita, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, so in general, mental health is not really it's not given much significance in India. And it worsens when we talk about the mental health conditions of prisoners, and it again worsens when we talk about the mental health conditions of those who are given capital punishment. Now, Indian prisons are typically overcrowded places where there is little to no concerns about the comfort or the privacy or the health of these prisoners. There's a study that Project 39A did, which basically majorly focused on the mental health conditions of the death row inmates in India. And there are a lot of instances in the study that time and time again show the bad conditions of the said inmates. For instance, 34 out of 63 prisoners had thought about suicide in prison, and 8 out of the said 34 had gone and committed suicide. And most of the prisoners had major depression. According to the study, the death row inmates, they had the presence of depression in these death row inmates. It was 11 times higher than the presence of depression amongst the general population. Also, suicide was not just a result of depression or anxiety or other mental illnesses. One of the prisoners had attempted suicide because of the stress of being sentenced to death. And over 75% of the issues that over 75% of the prisoners that were interviewed, they had issues with intellectual functioning, which eventually hindered their ability to rationally judge, which eventually even if it's mentioned before in the ongoing conversation as well, that if a person is not able to make rational judgment, I mean, mental health should be considered a factor while imposing death punishments, while imposing capital punishment. Also, another noteworthy aspect is the relationship between the mental illness and the substance abuse amongst the prisoners. Substance abuse is like a substance like tobaccos and ganja. They were smuggled inside the prison. And the studies showed that 20% of the prisoners that were interviewed had substance abuse disorder, which is like only 4% less than the substance abuse disorder present in the general metro population. Also, anxiety was very, very high. 19 prisoners were out of all the prisoners that were interviewed, 19 prisoners had they were diagnosed with general anxiety disorder. And I mean, time and time again, I'm trying to reiterate the idea of how bad the mental health conditions were in these death row inmates. And it also might seem like it's not that big of a deal because eventually they are going to die because they are given death punishment. However, we all fail to understand that these disorders that come as a result of being given death sentences, they prevent a person from engaging in prison activities, which eventually build a healthy, productive life in prison. So, I mean, my point is that mental health, again, it should be considered, it should be given enough importance. And also, having mentioned how less the officials are concerned about the mental health, even the ones that were concerned about the mental health of the prisoners who were diagnosed with anxiety or depression or various other mental disorders, there is so much lack of knowledge amongst the officials, again, people who are learned, people who are prison officials, that they did not really know what treatment to give to those that were diagnosed with mental illnesses. And as a result of which, the treatment was very questionable. The diagnosed prisoners, they were given sleeping pills. And even that treatment was considered something to be of privilege. So, I mean, again, I've been kind of reiterating this notion of the court giving importance to mental illness when considering when imposing death punishment. And in one situation, the Supreme Court, they noted that mental illness amongst a prisoner who was given capital punishment, and they warranted that the death punishment of the prisoner should be changed to life imprisonment, which is not essentially a solution, but it is one step ahead of what we see in terms of the relationship between mental illnesses amongst the death row inmates. And yeah.
Right. So just a small point to continue to what Ishita just said regarding the death penalty and depression and anxiety. So our system is built in such a manner that if there's a presidential pardon or something being asked for, there is so much time between the request and between the receiving the answer that that the prisoner doesn't know if he's going to die tomorrow or next week. And this actually really builds on that anxiety and depression because he won't know when he's going to die. For all he knows, he's going to get a letter in 2 days, he's going to be dead. So this is one of the main reasons why they're so anxious or depressed. They just want to end this constant turmoil of wandering. So if it's shifted to life imprisonment, it is a very big difference. At least you know you're not going to be killed. Or if you have a particular date where you're going your death penalty is there, then that's, again, it's going to give you a certain relief, I would say, to at least know what's going to happen as compared to not knowing what's going to happen tomorrow. Right. Anyways, continuing. Shreya, you had your hand before, so why don't you go?
To build on to that part about death row itself, India is one of the only 55 countries that still continues to practice death row. And second of all, I mean, if you're considering death punishment, I feel like it again brings into question, what is the point of imprisonment? Is it rehabilitation or is it punishment? And then there also begs the question of who is being punished in the society. if we consider statistics, I mean, the study that Ishita quoted, according to that, the death row is affecting marginalized communities horrendously more than upper caste communities. Only 10% of the victims that they interviewed are from upper caste. 27% refused to say, and some of them may be upper caste. But barring that, there were 25% who were from scheduled caste, 5% from scheduled tribes, and 21% from OBC. These are voluminous, unignorable statistics if we consider this. So we have to realize that, again, to go back to the point that was raised, even the last question, do these people know about this array of plea that they can opt for? And it's so apparent that only a certain part of society is being affected by these punishments and these laws and death row itself. So it again begs the question of existing differences and how they affect how mental health is affected by those.
Okay, so basically what I was talking is like a really small, like, and recent example is for the COVID, during the COVID time when there was lockdown and all initiated. So the prisoners, it definitely did affect their mental health because they were not allowed to visit their families, friends, whatever. So like they're just stuck in like a position like inside those four walls, and it's of course going to affect their mental health. And nobody can forget that, even like how we even spoke about in the whole time right now, that even prisoners are like, and the rate of suicide inside the jail is much higher as well as like in the outside world also. And the medical facilities given to them, like they are open to like giving medical facilities, but the healthcare system like in India, like as how like Nandini has also said, like, you know, there are laws, but it's so hard to like put them in effect. And even with the medical health system and all, they should not forget that giving psychiatrists and medic and prisoners counseling is very, very important, but none of them are actually like reiterated, and like they don't even talk about it as such, like why is it really important, and especially during the whole lockdown time right now.
To reiterate what Sanchali just said about healthcare, India's healthcare is problematic. India's mental health care is even worse because we do not have enough psychologists, we do not have enough psychiatrists. None of them are qualified enough to be of any help. Quite a lot of them would do more damage than good. So, building upon mental health care, and that's all going to start once the stigma around mental health is done away with, because that's one of the biggest reasons why India hasn't been able to grow out of the rut where we do not have mental health care that's decent. Shreya, you have something to add?
Yeah, I mean, the reality of the situation is, even though it is mentioned that that death row prisoners have to go through a mental check before they are before they're killed, the reality is 62.6% of prisoners are on death row right now have been found with having at least one mental disorder, classified by a psychiatrist. Like existing psychiatric problems indicate that they have problems. And I mean, India has a failing infrastructure when it comes to not just mental health but healthcare in general, I feel. And I mean, I know I'm digressing here, but right now our new budget will focus 16% on defense with negligible focus on health and education, which are two of the sectors that might improve this condition in our country. And even during a pandemic, the government or the state has always focused on issues that do not really relate to the realities of everyday situation for for Indian prisoners, but everyone in general. And these things can be improved with better budget allocations. I know I'm digressing here, but these are also important considerations in the larger issue here.
It's true, it's true. If only we had enough money to improve this. Right. So now that we've looked into what it is like for the prisoners already in prison, is our system, like, is our legal system good enough? So the question is, should diminished responsibility be incorporated as a plea along with section 84 of the IPC for individuals who have mental illnesses for committing murder, as like this is something that is provided in the English legal systems, English legal systems. So should we also have that in ours? Okay, let Shia go first, and then Lovanshi, if you would like to speak on this.
Just to say, the first thing that comes to a person's mind when one mentions the idea of diminished responsibility is, what if the misuse of the law? It's quite shitty, but that's what comes to one's mind. It's a similar thing that happens when one discusses mental rape. What about the misuse of the law? But the reality of the situation is, diminished responsibility would be an excellent addition to the Indian Penal Code, because it is in fact a real crisis where a person, just because you cannot classify that they were not completely in touch with reality, that it's like a glass half full situation. Just because the glass is half full doesn't mean it's not half empty as well. That means there was some kind of impairment in their mental situation that caused them, or that was behind their intention to perform such a criminal act. So it should of course be a consideration. And even if imprisonment is happening for such individuals, they should of course play into their sentencing, if not their pardon completely.
Right.
Right. I want to delve a little bit into the section 84 of the IPC itself. So basically, this section doesn't really mention the word insanity. It mentions about the mental soundness of mind, and which also creates problem, because we don't really have a set definition what insanity is in our legal system, or what is so basically it says that there can be the defense is that once you prove that the person was not able to know the nature of the act they are committing, or they don't know the consequences of the act at the time of perpetrating the act, then they can take this defense. But problem arises when how do we differentiate good from the bad, because court really looks to the question if that person was able to differentiate between what is right or what is wrong. Here the complication again builds up. Also, if we look towards the English law itself, English law does gives a really wider kind of defense if we take in that way. They also initially it was like that, it was similar to what we have currently in the Indian system, but they have kind of built on and looking the type of you know evolvement of the mental illnesses. They have taken into consideration the standard mental disorders as well, because we have to look that the definition of medical insanity and legal insanity is completely different. In legal insanity, different tests has to be done, and which does not really overlaps with the medical insanity. Whereas what I really feel is that we should also look and give some credits to the science and the standard tests of psychologists as well, which I think in our legal system we don't really pay that much heed to. And there's this Durham law in English jurisprudence, where they do take into consideration the more objective and psychological standard, rather than focusing on the defense and subjective cognition. So what I feel is that if we start considering in our criminal system as well about the standard procedures of if the person is mentally ill, not like at the time of the person was insane or not, because the previous context or the buildup also matters. There was this case in I think New in Virginia, that a woman was a woman was the survivor, like a domestic violence survivor, and she came to a point that she couldn't resist but kill her husband, and she kind of got on the test of irresistible impulse, and she wasn't held to be guilty. Why? Because she was not in a mental setup that not to be convicted. Why? Because she was also a victim herself, and her mental health was deteriorated to that level. But if we see the same context and put that into Indian context, according to the law, the person in the similar situation wouldn't will be convicted and wouldn't be able to plead not guilty. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of give like a history to how it differs in Indian context and English context. So I think there needs to be, first of all, some regulations and like more precise meaning, rather than being ambiguous in what insanity is. One, how can we prove how a person cannot misuse this defense? We do need more work on that matter. Yeah.
Okay, so just a small response to Lavanshi and everybody else who has spoken so far. India's system does have space to grow, but it has also been growing the last few years. India does recognize provocation, it does recognize mental health issues, and it is growing. And Project 39A, there are other organizations such as Project 39A do help achieve these goals in a gradual manner. But of course, there is always room to grow. So with that, we would end our session. It has been a very good one. To just to have a small recap, we understood that depression levels are very high in prison, suicide levels are very high. Statistically, the people who are in prison are not privileged enough to have any access to mental health care or legal aid, which might help them obtain something that could get them out of prison on the basis of mental health. We still have a long way to go, despite the way that we have come. There is a lot to be learned from other countries such as England. And yes, India needs better healthcare, and this is something not only for prisons, it's also something that is for people who are outside prisons. It's for us, it's for people who are not privileged enough. We need better healthcare in this country, and that's another debate altogether. So thank you for this conversation. It was nice talking to you all.